Good morning, Wheel and Anchor members. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is a little bit of a different webinar that we're presenting to you. And the idea is here that we're going to talk a little bit about the future of travel. Let's face it, the world has changed so much in the last 5 months. It was inconceivable as we rounded out 2019, what would happen to us in 2020. I think we're all sort of shaking our head in disbelief. And so the idea here is that we're going to look a little bit about travel and what we can expect for the future and what we're thinking about here at Wheel and Anchor, which is why we want feedback from our members because that's what we're all about. So first of all, for those of you who have not participated in one of our webinars before, I'll just touch on briefly what we're all about here at Wheel and Anchor. We are a member-driven organization, so we're different than a normal tour company because our mission, my mission, is to have people who are travelers, true travelers, like-minded travelers who have a passion for exploring the world and perhaps immersing themselves a little bit more deeply into the places that we visit rather than on just a sort of a conventional tour and enjoying the company of other like-minded people. I've spoken to many, many members over the last few months as I've been following up with people who've traveled with us before, and that is the consistency theme. People really appreciate traveling with people. It's like traveling with a bunch of friends. You know, you always have a better time. Similarly, I have a mission, which is that each and every one of our members becomes well-traveled and well-connected. And well-traveled for me, and I've said this 100 times before, is more than just checking off boxes on your bucket list. I think that's very validating. I have a bucket list as well, and I have a list of places that I visited, a list of countries. But it's really about gaining an understanding of the world, becoming connected to people in other countries, as well as to other travelers, and it just makes us, I think, more worldly people, and that the greater the understanding we foster for each other, the better the life is on our planet. So joining me today for our webinar, as usual, so I'm Gordon, I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor. I think I know almost everybody on the call on the webinar today. I'm joined by Joel Curry, who's hiding behind the logo. He provides our technical support in the background, as well as Paula Zarnik. Many of you may have spoken with Paula on the phone. She is our senior trip specialist and is on the front lines managing all of our trip bookings and the like. So well, I'm excited to have them both on. They will be monitoring the chat box as well to assist me and make sure that your questions get answered yeah, and that we deliver this according to expectations. So what our plan today is, well, you can imagine what this year has been like for us in the travel business. And many of you have reached out to me, and I really appreciate that, you know, you expressing your thoughts as we go through the most difficult year that I have ever experienced, certainly in my career in travel, which is the better part of 30 years. And, you know, we are really trying to figure out where to go from here. And this is one of the steps in that process. And because we are a member-driven organization, and I emphasize that over and over again, because the input that we get from you, our members, you're like our sounding board. You know, we toss an idea out, and you give us your feedback, and then we modify it. And we want to create the kind of experiences, and particularly now more than ever, given that travel is going to be different in the future, we want to get your input and understand better what your thoughts are as we develop our strategy going forward. We put a tremendous amount of work into, you know, canceling trips, rebooking people for next year. You know, the amount of paperwork, the amount of bureaucracy we've gone through has been absolutely horrendous. And in the meantime, of course, that does not add a nickel to our bottom line. That's not the point. The point here is that for me, it's about developing a closer relationship with all of you, with our members, as we look to the future, because that's all there is to do. So today we are going to be talking, first of all, about what travel looks like right now in terms of the status of the pandemic around the world, how we think it's going to change, and it's important we get some feedback from you on that. And then a new concept that we're thinking about introducing, as well as some sample itineraries in the northern part of Europe and the UK and Ireland. And we'll be having a series of these webinars talking about itineraries in different parts of the world and how we would modify them inside a world that's now affected by the coronavirus. So that's the plan for today. So let's start out. Again, I really, really encourage you to give us some feedback, ask questions, make comments about anything that's said. Yeah, as I say, we track everything because it informs how we're going to plan the future. Anyway, let's get started without further ado, because we have a lot to cover today. First of all, let's take a look at what the situation is today. So I've pulled together some statistics. Joel and I have put together just so we get an understanding of the current reality of the virus around the world. You've all been reading the headlines every day. And so I don't want to go into any great detail on this, but I think we know where we stand now. The graphs talking about coronavirus paint a pretty grim picture. Let's face it, with you know, a total of 17 million cases. The interesting thing, though, despite the fact that the virus is still spreading around the world, it's primarily in a few countries. And I think that's a very important point. I think we all know who they are. The USA, India, Brazil are where it is really a problem, and, you know, a handful of other countries. But there's some interesting, you know, the interesting point that we have to extract from this is that 99% of cases, of current active cases, are mild. And that is not meant to be dismissive at all of this. We have to take this, and we are taking this extremely seriously. But, you know, the fact is that 1% are serious or critical. And I think that rate is improving. So progress is being made. I'll get to that in a second. Let's look at Canada for a second. You know, Canada, I think, has done a pretty good job. We're down to 4,800 active cases of the virus. And again, consistent with the global trend, about 1% are serious or critical. So at the moment, less than 50 people in Canada are in serious condition with the virus, which is, you know, a sobering statistic, in the sense that, you know, considering the impact that it's had on all of our daily lives, the fact that we have been able to bring this under control, flatten the curve effectively, means a lot for our country, but it also means a lot as it relates to travel. And again, I'm going to get to that point in just a moment. There's another interesting point at the top right of your screen there, that 79% of the fatalities that have occurred as a result of this have happened in nursing homes. That is an absolute tragedy in and of itself. But and again, not to say that there's any silver lining necessarily, but the fact of the matter is that you know, the majority of fatalities in Canada happen there. What does this all mean? Again, where do we come back to with this as far as travel is concerned? Well, let me come to that in just a second. I just want to point out one other statistic, because the media is full of all the statistics about this. This is what we read every single day in the headlines. And when we look at the overall cases of coronavirus coming, 20 million in the world will be at soon, and the number of deaths and all the rest of it. But, you know, the good news, if you will, is, as I said before, the number of active cases. That is the, you can barely see it there, the dotted purple line on the graph at the left, which shows that, you know, we've held the number of active cases down to a small number. And although there are cases, you know, there are certainly outbreaks happening here and there, you know, largely it would appear to be under control in much of Canada, which kind of begs the question, and I'm curious to know your thoughts. How do you think that we have fared in this whole pandemic? What kind of a job do you think that we've done from a government standpoint, you know, a medical standpoint, our wonderful community of people that have got us through this crisis, not to mention the social response. Yeah, I'd love to know some thoughts about how you think Canada's done. Troy had said, Troy's comment to, for example, is he said, oh, not too bad. I think it's been difficult for work. I think that is undoubtedly for many people. Our members less so, because a lot of our members are either retired or semi-retired. A lot are still at work as well, but I think that the economic impact has been absolutely huge. Kendra and Janine from Whitby say that they've done an excellent, that Canada's done an excellent job with compliance. And I think that that is well worth highlighting and mentioning because, you know, we've been able to keep this situation under control because we feel a certain sense of responsibility to each other. And therefore, you know, we've followed the rules, frankly, that have been prescribed by the experts. You know, Fran made the comment that having the federal government support the provincial plans, so the degree of sort of cooperation and coordination between various levels of government seems to be have been very good, better than usual, and that has helped us a great deal. You know, we are certainly all well aware that other countries have not been as successful in that. You know, Diane feels that Canada's done a stellar job right from the beginning to identify the risk and to act to mitigate it as much as possible. You know, I think, you know, the whole mask wearing thing, for example, people got on board with that. They understood. We were already used to it because, you know, a lot of parts of our community, we have a large Asian population in Canada. And of course, they're very accustomed, you know, whenever they're ill, they put on a mask. And so, you know, it wasn't for us a foreign concept. It's just like, you know, very matter of fact. You know, Eric says as well, by just looking at the numbers, we've done an outstanding job. Challenges ahead, schooling, back to school time in the very near future as well. And so Marilyn commented as well that the Atlantic bubble has been good for the Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, etc. But you know, obviously challenges for the rest of the country and for tourism and so on and so forth. So good. Well, I think that is great to highlight. I think there is a general consensus, and I've gotten that sense as well. We feel very relieved to be Canadians at this point in time with how the situation has been handled. So let's get back to travel, because this is about Future Travel Forum. And so I want to just take a look at the short and medium term outlook from my perspective. By no means do I have a crystal ball. If I did, I'd have it right here and I'd be smashing it open saying, what on earth is going to happen next? But the first prerequisite for getting back to traveling is the situation in Canada being under control. And as we've established, we are in the process of getting it under and keeping it under control. It's starting to look pretty good. But the second requirement, of course, is that Canada scale back its travel advisory, because at the moment, as you well know, we have a avoid all non-essential travel outside of Canada. So, you know, it's a blanket for the rest of the world. And I think that we need to move towards a situation where we at least highlight the countries that are high risk, and then perhaps open up travel bubbles or travel channels with countries where who equally have the situation under control. Of course, that is prerequisite on the third requirement, which is that countries will start to let us in without quarantine. There are several countries in Europe, for example, where we can travel to now without being quarantined. But of course, then at the moment, we have to go into quarantine when we come back to Canada. And so that's one of the things that, frankly, is keeping me from traveling back to Canada right now, because yeah, I'm not keen on going into quarantine. Of course, I will if I have to. That goes without saying. But I think for most of us, traveling anywhere and facing quarantine, either in our destination or returning home, is not really an option. And the last prerequisite to travel is that the airlines start to fly, and they're certainly flying domestically more and more all the time. But there are still a tremendous number of routes that have not been resumed yet, because let's face it, if you can't get in, there's no point in flying there. The map that you see in front of us is the most current map showing the world and what's open and closed. So you see a lot of red and a lot of pink, which means either completely closed or partially open. And so right at the very moment, let's face it, travel is not really an option to much of the world. The countries in green, well, I see Brazil and Mexico on there. I don't think I would recommend travel to either of those countries at this point in time, in spite of the fact that they are technically open. There's no restrictions to travel there. It shows, you know, Fran points out that Australia and New Zealand are partially open. Again, we rely on this data from other places. I am not sure the current status, because they technically have locked down again, to my understanding as well. And so they're not letting in any travelers at this point in time, other than, of course, their own citizens. So the current status, of course, is, well, we're not going anywhere anytime soon. Looking at the airlines, as I mentioned, one of the other prerequisites is the airlines flying again. As we all know, the airlines have been absolutely slammed. The IATA, which is the International Association of Airlines, are now saying they've pushed the date back by 1 year until airlines will return to pre-pandemic traffic levels. So they're now saying it's not going to be until 2024. Massive impact in terms of losses in the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been suffered or are projected to be suffered this year. And some pundits are even suggesting that the industry may consolidate by as much as 30 to 50%. So we may see a lot fewer airlines operating by the time this is all over. What does it mean for air travelers? Because a lot of people ask the question, what's going to happen to, air tickets and the price of air tickets? Where, as travelers, we're always like, oh my God, the price of air tickets can't possibly go up. At the moment, they're cheap as chips, but of course, if you can't go anywhere, that doesn't help you much. My own personal prediction is that, notwithstanding the volatility of airfares that's predictable, I think that the airlines will have no choice but to consolidate supply. In other words, reduce the number of routes and reduce the number of aircraft and the size of the aircraft, which will ultimately push prices up. And then it's going to be a balance between providing enough supply so that prices don't go too high, because people just aren't going to travel if the price of an air ticket that is going to be double or triple what you're accustomed to paying. So a lot of stuff happening there. Let's talk for a moment about vaccines, because when I spoke to all of our members, or many of our members over the last couple of months, the common theme was that, well, don't really feel comfortable traveling until we have a vaccine. And so, there's a lot of concern about that, particularly given that we're heading towards fall, and the concerns about a potential second wave. They were seeing a second wave in some other countries around the world. Fran mentioned Australia and New Zealand that have seen outbreaks, even though they had the situation very much under control. But one positive thing from Australia is that their flu season was actually considerably better. They had 90% fewer deaths in Australia as a result of influenza, partly because of the measures that people were taking for coronavirus, but also sort of general improved, sort of sanitary behavior and so on and so forth. So the jury is still out. Let's cross our fingers that we get through the next couple of months and get closer towards this vaccine. There are, of course, many vaccines that are under development right now. And this is, again, a lot of news stories that have come out. The scale of science that is working on this particular problem is absolutely unprecedented. Humanity has never come together like they have before to try and solve this problem. But let's be frank, the fastest time in which a vaccine was ever produced before was for mumps, and that took 4 years for an effective vaccine to be released. So if we get it done by the end of, Bill Gates seems to think it's going to be the end of next year. Anthony Fauci seems to think it's going to be the end of this year. I don't think anybody really knows, but there certainly are at least 7 vaccines in phase 3 trials. I've read a number of studies about what they're trying to accomplish, and there have been significant strides forward. So I feel confident that we may see a vaccine in the not too distant future. I think it's also worth noting that the treatments for people who have contracted the disease have become quite a bit more effective. So less people needing respirators or ventilators, less people succumbing to the disease, at least in the developed world. So progress is good on that front. I'm going to change track again, away from all the grim reality, and let's move to travel itself. What's going to happen in the short and the medium term? And I'm not going to spin any stories here. as much as I, am the eternal optimist. And I'd like to say, oh, we're all going to get back to traveling in early 2021. Let's face it, irrespective of whether a vaccine gets released or not, coronavirus, I think, is going to be around for a long, long time. And you've probably read the articles and the studies as well. The strain of virus that this is, it's just not easy to eradicate completely. And so I think that for those of us who are determined to travel, regardless, we are going to have to confront the fact that the coronavirus is likely to be out there. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that the way that we travel is going to have to take this into account. We're going to want to travel in a way that lowers as much as possible our risk of contracting the disease. And that I can foresee will mean taking less flights. Although the airline industry is adamant that flying is safe because of the HEPA filters that filter out 99% of the disease and bacteria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The fact is, if you put 200, 300 people in an enclosed space on a plane, it seems to me that the risk is high. And so we're just going to want to take less flights. I say we, I mean the royal we, people in general. We're going to want to avoid airports, avoid crowded spaces in general, and any kind of high-risk activities. So they've classified all of the different things that constitute high-risk activities, like attending a choir concert is a very high-risk activity that where you have the potential to contract the virus. So the prerequisites for travel are also likely to be quite onerous. They certainly are now. If you want to come here to Thailand, for example, you have to have a corona test in advance of departing the country within 72 hours. You have to fill in all kinds of forms when you arrive. You have to download an app that keeps track of exactly where you are. Then you have to, at the moment here, you have to quarantine and do 2 more corona tests at the beginning and the end. It's today, in the present moment, traveling around the world in many places is extremely challenging. Other places less so. But the reality is that certain aspects of these measures are undoubtedly going to remain in place for quite some time, specifically the tests. And the testing, for me, if you ask me, is going to be the key to at least enabling us to travel more, because as long as we can identify where the virus is, and they're developing all kinds of quick tests, finger prick tests, saliva tests, that will enable a result to be given that's highly accurate, maybe not 100%, but if you can get to sort of an accuracy rate of above 95%, it will at least give people enough comfort, taking the other measures into account as well, and the contact tracing, that we should be able to move around with a fair degree of comfort and security. So what does that mean? Well, here's one interesting comment. The big ship cruise industry has been, at least based on the reports that we've gotten, and what we've heard from our contacts in that industry, has come roaring back. So cruise lines have reported huge bookings and sales, largely because they've obviously chopped their prices to as much as 90%. In order to try and regain some of the consumer base that they've lost over the last 5 months or so. And so for me, it's case in point that people are desirous of traveling. But my question to you is, would you go? Would you go on a big cruise ship? So, the cruise cost $5,000 before, it's now $500. Would you go in the next 12 months on a large cruise ship? So take a moment, if you would, and let me know that, and we'll come back to you with a statistic in a bit. But I'm curious to see whether you would definitely not go on a large ship cruise, irrespective of whether you would ordinarily or not. But I'm just thinking, in the context of today, the opportunity presents itself to join on a big ship. The price was right, and so you'd either definitely not consider it, you might consider it, or you definitely would take advantage of that opportunity. And I see some comments here from members. You know, some people are not fans of large ship cruising. We're well aware of that. I think we're pretty clear on you know, where our members stand. Yeah, there's roughly a third of our members who are regular large ship cruisers, and it's a very valid form of travel. So I mean, you know, I've been on a few big ships in my travel career, so to speak. You know, Eric comments as well. Of course, it depends on the size of the ship. So for the purpose of this question, we're talking about large ships, 1,000 passengers and more. Definitely, small ship cruising is a little bit of a different animal as far as this is concerned. So just to give you a sense, roughly 70% of respondents just now said they would not consider cruising right now, but 30% would consider it. So so there you go. So I think that's somewhat indicative of the market of a whole. There are people out there that are super anxious to travel, and you know, price definitely, I would say, almost always plays a role in that. So I thought that you'd find that question interesting. So let's take a moment and let's see what it means for Wheel and Anchor. So as I said at the outset, what we're in the process of doing, what we've been doing for the last couple of months, you know, we've released most of our 2021 tour programs, as you know, and all of those are up, almost all of those are up on our website already. But we're looking beyond that, because this is the time of the year into fall when we are not so much planning for next year. We already have to have that in the books already, but we're planning for the year beyond. And given what I said before, that travel is likely to change. I think our attitude towards travel and how we travel are, you know, is probably going to shift. We have been doing some thinking about how that could look. So some of the trends that we're predicting, for example, in the short term, there will be deals, just like I just mentioned about large cruise ships lines. There's going to be deals because, you know, cruise lines in particular, whether it's big ships, river cruises, whatever it may be, but also hotels, resorts, are going to be anxious to get people moving again. So there's going to be some great deals in the not too distant future. Whether or not we will be willing to avail ourselves of those deals, and, you know, while the pandemic is still going on, well, that's a different story. But that's one of the things that's going to happen in the short term. As I said before, I think people will be taking fewer flights or thinking twice about getting on a plane, and, you know, how many flights that they're going to have to go on any given itinerary. You know, flying has certainly in the last 20 years not gotten any more comfortable. It's gotten less comfortable, and it's about to get worse because of all of the measures that are likely going to be in place for the next few years. So perhaps you'll go less often or less places. We talked about long stay holidays some weeks ago, where we're going to go to one place, one country, one region for a whole month or longer. Which means that we don't have to get on and off an airplane. I think less moving around in groups. So, you know, as a small group travel company, this has been a big issue. And let's face it, if you contemplate a whole bus full of people traveling into, you know, let's say the middle of Rome and visiting the Vatican, where there's, you know, tens of thousands of people on any given day, that kind of experience, I suspect people are going to be wary of, and it's something that we have to figure out. How are we going to get around that? And we have some ideas. I'm going to bring those to you in just a second. I think that longer stops in each place are probably something that people are going to look for, because if you spend longer in one place, so, you know, let's say your typical itinerary through Europe was, you know, 14 days, and you visit, you know, 8 different cities. You know, you're sort of in a different place, you know, every other day. A lot of on and off of coaches, on and off of transportation, checking in and out of hotels. And the greater degree to which we are moving around like that puts us at a higher risk for exposing ourselves to potential sources of the virus. So I have a feeling that people are going to want to go to less places where we can be a little bit more careful about how we move around and who we interact with. And a demand for even more independent time. And, you know, it's been a hallmark of ours at Wheel and Anchor that we always try to include, you know, at least a day free at any sort of major stop that we make along the way, or a couple of half days at least. Like, you have the time to explore on your own. I suspect that even more so, the degree to which we can say, oh, I want to stay away from the hordes of people. I want to do my own thing. I want to just enjoy the pace, the atmosphere, you know, of the place, and be able to sort of separate myself. I suspect that that is going to be something else that we're going to see. So previously, you know, I had said my rule of thumb was we try to stay at least 3 nights, if not 4, in any one destination, if it's a, you know, a large enough city or a town to justify it. But now we're talking about 5 nights or even longer. So, question back to you as our membership. Has the virus changed the way you think about travel, or the way that you propose to travel? And if so, what do you think will be different? I see a comment here from Fran about, you know, the travel advisories, and it's like, you know, they're not saying you can't travel, but you could travel, but you're taking a risk, and you may not be able to get travel insurance, or your travel insurance may not cover you, because, you know, and that's a whole other topic we could spend a whole other webinar on, is will your travel insurance cover you or not, when there is a blanket advisory from the Canadian government avoiding against all non-essential travel. And so, you know, it's a big question, and it's an extremely important question, because I wouldn't recommend to anybody to leave Canada without proper insurance in place. So back to the question: has the virus changed the way you think you'll travel? And if so, what do you think will be different? So, you know, Maureen comments that distance will be a major consideration. So I think that's a very valid point, particularly in the short term. You know, are you going to want to hop on a 16-hour flight to travel from Toronto to Hong Kong, for example? You know, that's going to be, I think, a big one. Jean's commented that, you know, she's certainly more cautious. And so I think we're all going to be a little bit more cautious. I'm curious, what does that mean to you? If you envision yourself on a trip or planning a trip, what things would you plan to do or plan to not do that you might have ordinarily done? So yeah, I'm curious for any more feedback. I know for myself, and you know, this is something that's not necessarily changed because of the virus, but I fly a lot, as many of you will know. I fly from, you know, all over the world. But one thing I do when I'm flying is that I don't necessarily pick the most direct route from A to B, which may sound strange to some of you, but, you know, I choose my flight often based on the airline, who the carrier is, or the airports that I'm going to be passing through. And I also choose a more comfortable route. So, and I've suggested this often to our members, where, you know, if you're flying from, you know, let's say to, you know, the Middle East, or let's say if you're flying from to Asia, for example. So, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, I want to take the nonstop, the longest flight I could take, you know, Toronto, Hong Kong, get there all in one go. But, you know, if you broke up that trip and you flew, you know, from the shortest possible leg and then took a layover, and more airlines are allowing this kind of thing, so that you have, you know, broken it up into segments that, first of all, limit the amount of time that you're actually spending in an aircraft, allows you to have a good night's sleep along the way. I mean, what's the rush of getting there, right? So that's one of the things for me is that, you know, I tend to, sometimes I'll take 2 days to get to a destination that might otherwise take 9 or 10 hours on one flight. But if I get a good night's sleep along the way, I'm combating the jet lag and all the rest of it. You know, Patricia makes a comment that air travel is a concern. You know, how do we know that we're going to be safe if we don't know our fellow passengers' health? That's exactly the point. And I think that the testing aspect of it is going to be the paramount thing. I foresee within the next year that there's a very strong likelihood we'll have to get tested before getting on board any aircraft. And we've seen it already in Canada at home, the number of flights that have had coronavirus positive people on board, you know, when, yeah, because there was no way of knowing until after the fact, until they displayed some symptoms, whether or not they had it or not. You know, Diane said smaller groups at a destination. And this is definitely something that we're thinking about, is, how do we avoid the masses? How do we avoid traveling in a large group ourselves? And when I say large, for us, large is like 20 people. But how do we even reduce that number even further so that the points of exposure are reduced? Joel commented, even before you get to the airport is going to be a consideration. Deb said the quality of medical care of destination is important, and whether English is spoken. Absolutely. There's a lot of countries in the world have a great medical system, and the ability of that system to be able to cope with the situation. And we've seen that being tested in so many different places where it's been pushed to and beyond capacity. And so sort of having an understanding that is very important. And Jean confirmed as well, I think, the same thing that we're saying is that you can't control the health of airline passengers without testing them. So, for me, I think that's going to be something that's going to be necessary. In fact, it was something we were even contemplating ourselves, is the ability to which we could procure rapid testing kits for ourselves to the extent that that'll be possible. And I know that they already exist and they're already under development. If we can procure them and then have them be part of our protocol in traveling with a wheel and anchor trip, and I'm not saying they will, but it's certainly something that I would seriously consider, making part of the trip. Fran says, stay away from wide open countries because you don't know who's come in before and after you. And, it's a good point. It's like we'd be like traveling to Brazil right now. Even though it's wide open, I don't think I could recommend that. Anyway, let's move along because I want to introduce a new concept to you. This is something that we've been thinking about in terms of how we could travel. And so we're calling it 5x5. And what 5x5 means is it's essentially a modular form of touring. And 5 means, in this case, 5 nights. It means 5 times 5 nights. So, we're looking at a program that would consist of, 5 modules of 5-night stays in 5 destinations across a particular country or a region or a part of a continent or whatever the case may be, depending on the geography where we're talking about. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to 5 places. It doesn't mean you have to spend 25 nights on one trip, because the whole idea is that it would be modular. So you could do 3 times 5. So you could do a 15-night trip. But the point here is that by spending 5 nights in a place, rather than the big distinction for me is, rather than just saying you've been there, you can actually say that you've spent time there. And if you think about the sort of the best places that you've visited in all of your travels, is the one you've spent the longest time is probably the one where you got the best feel for the place, because rather than being rushed around like mad, you actually had a chance to just sit and relax and take in the ambiance. And I've always been a fan of this. I've been fortunate to, in my own travels, to spend longer lengths of time in many places. And it's really have a different relationship to, these kinds of, these cities and these towns and so on. So by having 5 nights in a place, you've got more leisure time. It's still inside of a structured itinerary, but it also means that the way we envision this is that you'd have the ability to, go along and do excursions, with, a smaller group or with whatever people that you wanted to go along, but at the same time, have the ability to go out and see and do stuff on your own. So again, it's reducing that amount of time that you spend together. So you get the benefits of the group trip, but you're not being forced to, always travel and be herded around, right? I think this is a trend anyway in group travel. And I think the pandemic, if anything, is going to push us more towards a little groups within a group kind of idea. And that's what 5x5 is all about. So I'm going to position this for you now in 3 different segments of Northern Europe. So that's what this webinar was about. So obviously I've given you a bit of a snapshot on where we stand now in travel, what's likely to happen, what people will be looking for in the near future as we can move back to traveling. And here are sort of some ideas of some of the different places. So let's look first of all at the first region we're going to take in is Northern Europe, the UK, and Ireland. And in subsequent webinars over the coming weeks, we'll look at other parts of the world. So let's first of all have a look at Scandinavia and the Baltics. And so the Scandinavia and the Baltics program here on a 5x5 basis would basically take in all of the Scandinavia and the Baltic capitals, with the exception of Oslo. I left it out of this itinerary for a reason, but this isn't to say that this is the final itinerary. This is just a concept that we're working on, but I think it's a very interesting one. So in our Scandinavia and the Baltics program, and sorry, Joel, if we could just flip to the map slide, we'd be starting off in Copenhagen, obviously the capital of Denmark, and then heading up to Stockholm, continuing on to Helsinki, and then down to Tallinn, Riga, and then Vilnius. So basically be going all the way around the Baltic Sea. And so how that would look practically speaking is, we'd start off in Copenhagen, for example. And here's the thing with this itinerary, and all of these itineraries that I'm going to describe for you briefly now, is that any of these cities, you could easily spend 5 days just there, just wandering around, taking in all of the amazing sights and interacting with the local people. There is plenty to see. So I want to use the example now, for example, Copenhagen. So we'd spend 5 nights in Copenhagen. Of those 5 nights, and this is consistent throughout, we do like a half-day orientation tour. So we'd wander up the Struget, the pedestrian street that goes through the middle of Copenhagen, and past Tivoli Gardens, which is an amusement park open during the summertime. And it's more than amusement park. And we'd go to New Haven, which is the new harbor area. So we'd have time to explore Copenhagen in and of itself over about 2 days. But we'd also tour around Zealand. So Copenhagen sits on an island that separates Denmark as a country from Sweden. And so we'd visit Odense, which is another beautiful city. We do a day trip out there. We'd go and visit the palaces like Kronborg and Frederiksborg Castle, and maybe even hop over the Öresund Bridge over to Malmö, Sweden. And so, Copenhagen is a beautiful city, and there's lots to do in the immediate area. From there, we'd hop on a train, we'd go up by rail up to Stockholm. Stockholm is my favorite city of all of the Scandinavian capitals. It's absolutely magnificent because it's located on sort of it's located adjacent to an archipelago in the Baltic Sea, but also is surrounded by lakes. And in Stockholm itself, you've got, and I've been to Stockholm numerous times, you've got so many things to see. You've got the city hall, you see the red brown building there where all the Nobel Prizes are handed out. You've got the museum island. We would do a whole day cruise through the Stockholm archipelago, which is just magnificent countryside. Lake Mälaren, which is this massive lake with thousands of bays. So we'd spend some time, and you can walk. Most of Stockholm downtown is all walkable on foot. From there, we take an overnight ferry and we'd hop over to Helsinki, which is the capital of Finland. In Helsinki, again, there's really dramatic differences in most of all the people. The Swedes are quite, brash, confident. They love their drink. Very wonderful people. The Finns, on the other hand, totally laid back, almost shy, friendly, but shy and withdrawn. So you really get a culture shock when you go to a place like Helsinki. And Helsinki has some spectacular monuments to visit. The Rock Cathedral is one of my favorites. It's, this underground cathedral that they literally chopped out of the rocks. You'd spend a half day at Suomenlinna, which is the 18th century fortress that's on an island at in front of the harbor of Helsinki. And we go to a smaller town called Porvoo, which is a little medieval town dating back to the 14th century, and a wonderful place to visit on a day trip. And there you get the real, like Helsinki is a cosmopolitan city, but when you go to a smaller city like Porvoo, you get to feel the real sort of rural culture of the Finns. From Helsinki, we'd hop over the Baltic Sea by ferry to Tallinn. Tallinn and Helsinki are closely linked. A lot of people actually even commute back and forth. Tallinn, so Estonia, let me say this, the Baltic states as a whole, so have the same number of people as Toronto. So, it's a very interesting fact because, we don't know a lot about the Baltic states. I mean, we read, from time to time something about them, but between Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they've got about 6.2 million people. So it's roughly the same as Greater Toronto. And they've come a long way since the days of the Soviet Empire. and Tallinn is really the, has become sort of the economic hub of the region. It's super technologically advanced. There's a lot of young people that moved into Tallinn, but most of all, it has an incredible old town that is just spectacular. So it's very popular for people that visit from Helsinki. You wouldn't have to leave in 5 days in Tallinn, but we would still probably head out to Prangli Island for a day, which is just off the coast. It's a natural reserve, or we'd head down to a smaller town. So again, the theme here, consistent on these 5x5 programs, is that we try to do city, we do leisure time, we do rural experience, and we do people. And so by combining all those things, we really get a much more in-depth feel. And at the same time, again, taking this whole safety mitigation thing into account. From Tallinn, we then head down, we visit Tartu, which is the second largest city in Estonia, on our way to Riga. Riga is the biggest of the Baltic capitals. And it is actually it has the most Art Nouveau architecture of any capital city in the world. Almost a third of the buildings in downtown Riga are Art Nouveau. And you know, the Latvians themselves are very much like the Finns. The Estonians are a little bit more like the Swedes, a little bit more brash, a little bit more entrepreneurial, ambitious. You know, the Latvians are quite laid back and chill. And so, you know, you really see amazing differences when you travel between the two different countries. We would certainly take a full day out to visit the Gauja Valley, again, getting that rural element in, and get a good feel for Latvia. And our final stop on this 5x5, which is actually a 5x6, it would be Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania. And this is one that's often overlooked by people. So, you know, a lot of people will sort of do Helsinki and Tallinn, and a bunch more will head on to Riga, but then for some reason people don't often go to Vilnius. But the Lithuanians are the friendliest of all of the people in this whole region. Like, they're just super, super nice people. Once again, Vilnius, like any of these places, is worthy of spending several days in just to wander around. But while we're here, they have a very sobering Holocaust park called Panerai. You know, this is, you know, ranks up there with Dachau and Theresienstadt as, you know, places that really are, you know, remind us of, you know, of the history there. So that is the concept of how we would tackle Scandinavia and the Baltics. So if you went on the whole trip from beginning to end, it would actually be 30 nights. But some people might say, again, the whole notion of, well, if we get, you know, if we plan less trips but do more on each trip, we could do it all in one, or we would do it, part of it, we would just do the Scandinavian capitals, or do just the Baltic capitals. The whole point would be is that you'd be able to choose which 3 or 4 or 5 cities that you link together. So based on that, I'm just curious, what do you think about the itineraries? Is, yeah, I'd like to see the details when it's done, or yeah, no, I've been there, done that, not interested, or I'm not interested in this particular region. So there's no commitment to this, but we're really trying to get a sense of, is this the type of thing that would appeal to you in this region on a 5x5 basis? And by the way, in terms of details, this isn't something that we're going to release like next week or next month even. We have a lot of work to do to develop these programs because it's a different concept. So I appreciate that people like the idea, so that's already very reassuring. So I'm going to explain to you in just a moment, as soon as we finish this question here. I'll give you a similar example for the next 2 regions in Northern Europe. So we'll come back to that. I'll give you the results of that afterwards. Let's talk about the second region in Northern Europe. So Germany and the Benelux countries. So, you know, a lot of people will, you know, hit up Munich, or this year was supposed to be the Passion Plays in Oberammergau, which of course have been postponed by 2 years. There is so much to Germany as a country, and some people don't even like, some people have their aversion to traveling to Germany, but Germany is amazing, particularly if you do it in the way that I envision it here. And so let's take a look. This particular program I've taken starting in Bavaria in southern Germany, in Munich, heading up to Heidelberg, which is in the wine district not far from Frankfurt, then over to Aachen, which is adjacent to the Ruhr region of Germany, and then into Ghent and up to the Netherlands. So let me take you through the program. This is a little bit different because what I've done here, other than Munich, we're staying in smaller towns. And so we can visit the bigger cities nearby, but staying in some of these smaller cities or towns enables you, it just gives you a more safe sense of walking around without hordes of tourists everywhere. So anyway, let's go through them one by one and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So first of all, Munich. So Munich is the biggest city on this, that we're staying in on this trip, largely because there isn't a smaller town in the immediate vicinity that I would say, that's a charming place to stay. Not that there's not charming places in Bavaria, there certainly is. But Munich, you know, let's face it, Oktoberfest, and you know, it's the home of BMW, and an incredible Olympic Park. So much to see in Munich, you could spend forever there. But while in Munich, we are, you know, an hour and a half away from the Cinderella Castle, Schloss Neuschwanstein in the Southern Alps. We can visit Nuremberg, we can visit Dachau, for example. So there's a lot of places that are within a very easy hour or two drive from Munich. And, you know, we stay 5 nights here where you'd have a good couple of days to just wander the streets, you know, drink beer by the liter, like they do in good old Munich, and see, you know, really experience Bavaria, which is quite different than the other regions of Germany. From Munich, we'd hop on one of the fast trains and zip over to Heidelberg, which is just a couple hours away. And Heidelberg is a university town that sits on the German wine route. So it's between the Rhine-Hessen region and the Mosel region of Germany. It is such a charming town. And so rather than stay in Frankfurt, which actually is a very nice city, a lot of people just fly through Frankfurt, but Heidelberg is the kind of place where it feels like a small town. It's not that small, but it's still small enough that you would feel comfortable just wandering around and getting lost or not getting lost, as the case may be. As I say, from here, we definitely tour through the German vineyards, and a lot has changed about German winemaking since the days of Black Tower, when that was sort of their most famous brand. Thankfully, it's not anymore. They have some fantastic dry wines in the meantime. We visit the Black Forest, for example, which is just to the south of Heidelberg. From Heidelberg, we'd zip up to Aachen. So once again, Aachen, you may have never heard of Aachen before, but I remember it. I first visited Aachen almost 35 years ago. And I'll never forget their gingerbread cakes, for which they are so famous. And Aachen sits conveniently right on the border to Belgium and the Netherlands. You can, in about 15 minutes drive, you can be in, you know, those other two countries. So from Aachen, you get to visit a city like Maastricht in the south part of the Netherlands. And Maastricht, of course, is where the European courts are based. It's an ancient city, and it is really, it's like Amsterdam, but a much smaller, a much quainter, a much less busy place to visit. Similarly, Liège, which is in Belgium. We'd probably visit either Cologne or Dusseldorf while we're in Aachen, because again, all of these places are within an hour away. From Aachen, we'd then head up to Ghent. So again, a lot of trips through Belgium will take you into Brussels or to Antwerp, but I think Ghent is the place to be. Ghent, of course, famous for the Treaty of Ghent, which we should all know, because that was the treaty that settled the War of 1812 and established the location of the border between the US and Canada. But Ghent is a medieval city with these massive squares and markets. I was last in Ghent about a year ago, because they have a 9-day-long festival that literally goes 9 days in a row without stopping. I was only there for 1 day. That was enough for me. But it is a beautiful, beautiful city, a great place to spend 5 days. We can zip up to Bruges, which is on the English Channel on the North Sea, and probably the most beautiful city in that whole region. And you'd have to stop and see Brussels as well. Of course, because it's the European capital. So that would be our stay in Belgium. and then we'd head up to Utrecht. So you probably never heard of Utrecht. Utrecht is about a 25-minute train ride from Amsterdam. It's again a little university town that has this beautiful river going through it, like you see in the picture here. I love Utrecht because it's like being in Amsterdam without the zillions and zillions of people. And Amsterdam is now, in the meantime, and I wouldn't say we wouldn't go there, but I would go into Amsterdam for the day, and then I'd get out of there and spend the evenings and the other days in a place like Utrecht, because you get the same feel, you get warm, friendly people, and you can also visit from here Rotterdam, The Hague. So this is a perfect example of a place where you can see so many parts of the Netherlands and yet be based in a very quaint, small city that you can spend enough time walking around and getting that sense of Dutch culture, Dutch tradition, without being in the middle of a touristic, hotspot like Amsterdam. From Aachen, we'd probably go overland up to Bremen in northern Germany. And again, you'll notice that I didn't pick Hamburg, and Hamburg is one of my favorite cities in Germany. It's probably the most beautiful city in Germany. But Bremen is the one that's less known. I mean, you may remember Bremen from the Tales of the Brothers Grimm. It has a spectacular historical old town, and it's very quickly, you can access Hamburg. So you can go by train in about 40 minutes and spend the day in Hamburg. You can also visit Bremerhaven, which is the largest port in Germany, or sorry, the second largest port in Germany, but it's a massive, phenomenal thing to witness, to see, so much of Europe's trade going through this one spot, and then again be based in a beautiful old town. So that is an example of our Germany and the Benelux program. As I said before, none of this is written in stone. This is the idea that we have, but I'm curious, Jean mentioned no Berlin. We just talked about this before the webinar. So we might bolt on Berlin as the logical extension to this. So make one more stop for 5 nights in Berlin, because yeah, Berlin, you need 10 nights. So thank you, Jean, for pointing that out. And I'll definitely keep that in mind. So thinking about Germany and the Benelux, what do you think? Is it sound interesting? Would you like to see the details? Or no, been there, done that? Curious to see what you think about this concept in this particular region. So the final one that we're going to talk about today, after you enter your answer, so please take a moment and click on one of those buttons, and then Joel will wrap up the poll in just a second. So the third itinerary that I wanted to present to you, again, following the 5x5 concept, is the UK and Ireland. And so, this is one, when we did our travel inspiration survey last year, traveling to the UK and Ireland, frankly, were 2 of our most desired destinations. And so we've put together this program, again, following a 5x5 itinerary. And of course, we have a trip planned to Ireland in the spring. God willing, we'll be able to go. We have a trip planned to Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, also in the spring of 2021. But the 5x5 concept is one that we thought about. How could you cover, get a smattering of all of the British Isles in that period of time? Mary, good question about Eastern France. We'll come to France when we do our Southern Europe webinar, so our Southern Europe Future Travel Forum, which will be in a couple of weeks' time. So stay tuned for that one. So we'll cover Southern Europe, and we'll cover, and I'll mention the other regions at the end of the webinar. But let's talk a moment about UK and Ireland. So in the UK and Ireland, we'd start first of all down in the south. So just, flip on the map there for me, Joel. So we'd start down in the south. Again, let's not stay in London. Many of us have been to London already. I love London. It's one of my favorite cities. There's no question about it. But I think we'd probably stay down on the south coast in Brighton, because there you get a real flavor for British people. If you visit a city like Brighton, it's super popular in the summertime, but it's actually great any time of the year. I mean, the weather in England in the wintertime isn't great, but I'm not proposing that we would do this trip in the wintertime either. But by staying in Brighton, we can visit, for example, the White Cliffs of Dover. And so the whole south coast of the UK is really quite underrated, I think, in many ways. And a lot of people miss it because the focus always tends to be on London and Oxford and, you know, all of the places in the greater London area. And we certainly do that. Sorry, Joel, flip to the next slide. We would certainly visit, you know, London and take in a show, because let's face it, you can travel from Brighton to London and you can be in central London in about 45 minutes. It's really quick by train. And so, you know, you can go back and forth and not have the hustle bustle of being in London and feel like you're surrounded by millions of people. So we'd spend the first 5 nights in Brighton. And again, I think that whole area is very easy to travel around in on your own as well. So again, partially structured, partially organized, partially at leisure, with lots of options for you to do. From Brighton, we would zip overland and we would head to Bath. So Bath is near Bristol, so it's in the southwestern part of England, and it is a charming, charming town. I first went there, I don't even want to say it, okay, more than 30 years ago. And Bath, of course, is, you know, close to Stonehenge, for example, is not too far away. The city of Bristol, with its spectacular Bristol Downs walking tour, is an amazing place to go, and of course the Cotswolds. So from Bath, which is truly a charming city to spend some time. Most trips just sort of pass through. They say, oh, there's the, you know, there's the baths, there's the hot springs, and then you pass through. But spending time in this lovely town is well worth it. From Bath, we would then go north up to the south of Liverpool and stay in a lovely town called Chester, with its Roman and medieval walls. And I'd stay in Chester again because then you get the flavor of, you know, the central part of Britain. And from here, we can go up and visit, you know, the Beatles Museum and Memorabilia in Liverpool, which has really changed a lot in, you know, in the last 10 years. We would head over to Wales, because Chester is just a stone's throw from the Welsh border, and visit Snowdonia Park and see some of the amazing landscapes that they have on the, you know, in the northwestern part of Wales. From Chester, we would then go further up north and head into the Lake District of the UK, and stay in a lovely town called Windermere. Next slide, Joel, which is right in the middle of the Lake District. And you again get a completely different feel for the UK. And, you know, the Lake District is obviously popular among the English in the summertime. But it's, yeah, I remember the first time I went to the Lake District was in January, but everything was still green, and it was truly amazing. And Windermere, the Lake District, is known for some of you know, the UK's most celebrated poets, like Wordsworth and Beatrix Potter and so on and so forth. So we'll visit Ambleside and Keswick and all of these towns where they you know, where they wrote all of their famous works. We'll go to Barnard Castle in the North Pennines National Park. This is the most scenic part of England, I think, you know, that you could possibly visit. So from Edinburgh, we'll then do the next leg, which will be up to Edinburgh. And I decided that it would be best to stay in Edinburgh. I love Edinburgh. I mean, it's the smaller of the two, the big cities in Scotland, but it just oozes of Scottish culture, and just that whole walk along the Royal Mile up to Edinburgh Castle. You know, you could just walk back and forth along that for 5 days, because it's so many cool things and shops and little museums to see. But we would definitely take a day and visit Glasgow, because let's face it, you can hop over in about an hour between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then head up to St. Andrews, which with the famous golf course and the cathedral. And there's so many other places to visit in and around the southern part of Scotland, but Edinburgh would be a great base from which to do that. And then for the last leg of the UK part of the tour, we'd go by train up to Inverness, and it's a beautiful ride. You get up into the Highlands, into the Scottish Highlands, and Inverness, of course, located adjacent to Loch Ness, with the famous Loch Ness monster. but you know, this is, you know, the Highlands of Scotland are the real Scotland. You know, which is not to say that the cities aren't, but you know, when you pass through on the train of all of these, you know, hills and, you know, the sheep painted blue and red and all the rest of it to keep them apart. You know, there's nothing like the landscape of the Scottish Highlands. And, you know, one of my favorite trips is the train journey from Inverness all the way over to the Atlantic coast, which is where the Kyle of Lochalsh is located. And it's a wonderful train journey that you can do in a day. And we would have to spend at least a day doing some whiskey touring for those that are interested in whiskey. So lots to see around Inverness. And from there, we would end the UK part of our trip, and we would either fly out to Dublin for those that were going to continue on to the last segment, which would be in Ireland, or you can easily head back and fly to Canada from either Glasgow or Edinburgh, depending on where it is that you're flying from. So the last bit, Ireland, save the best for last, the luck of the Irish. So we would do 5 days in Dublin. And I think that it is worth to stay in Dublin because there's nothing like the vibe and the ambiance of the Irish capital. It's such a lively city, and so much has transpired there in the last 30 years. It's really hard to imagine. As I say, my first visit there was roughly 30 years ago. Some great side trips that we would do to Kilkenny and the Wicklow Mountains, as well as up to Belfast, which is a fascinating city itself and easily accessible on a day trip from Dublin. And then for this last leg of our 5x5 in the British Isles, we'd head to Galway. And of course, Galway is the incredible Atlantic coast of Scotland. And here, the Cliffs of Moher, which are probably the most you know, famous tourist attraction, but it's outside. So even though there's you know hundreds, if not thousands, of people on any given day that stand gazing at these cliffs, you can do so pretty much socially distanced. So, but spending 5 nights in Galway, again, there's so many cool things to see in this town, and very often it's just sort of bypassed on the way through to somewhere else. So between Connemara, Cliffs of Moher, the overall itinerary, again, this one is at the moment 6 times 5. So if you were to do the whole program, it would be 30 nights. But the idea here is not that, you know, we say, oh, you have to go for 30 nights, because, you know, that's a pretty onerous journey. But you could do just the England and Scotland portion, or you could do just the Ireland portion. And the whole thing is that our idea is that we would link these together. So we would likely do, you know, Germany and the Benelux either immediately before or after the Scandinavia program, or the UK and Ireland program, so that theoretically you could overlap one to the next. This is kind of the idea. So tell me what you think. Does it sound interesting? You want to see the details? Again, we'll be releasing these programs probably in the latter part of this year, if not early next year, once we get some feedback from our members. So far, Kendra, thank you. So the modular concept, and again, this is all something that is largely going to be driven by the feedback we get from our members. We know that people are looking for something different, you know, certainly as a result of the pandemic, but just in general. You know, I've spoken to a number of members, and I've taken their comments on video. I'll be releasing a video about that. But one of the common themes is that people appreciated having time on their own. And I think that now more than ever, it'll be important that we have a structure that enables you to see these places in an organized format, but at the same time, you know, have time to be able to just, you know, soak it all in, stop and smell the roses, as it were. Yeah, so Diane, the overlap is interesting. So of all the programs, which one sounds the most appealing to you? So if you were, let's say there was no pandemic, let's say it was all over and we all got our vaccination or whatever we get, would you choose Scandinavia and the Baltics? Would you choose Germany and the Benelux? Would you choose the UK and Ireland? Which is not to say we wouldn't do all three, but much like our trip inspiration survey that we did last year, we will look at the most popular of the itineraries, and then we'll build on them from there. So, and again, we're not holding you to any of this. It's just sort of indicative for us, because we have a lot of people on our webinar today. and I appreciate you all attending and indulging me in this discussion about future travel and some of the things that we're thinking about. So make your choice there, and then right after that, I'll be asking you if you have any other questions, comments about anything that we've talked about this morning. I'd love to hear your feedback. I see a comment here, Mary is saying she'd prefer to spend more time in Belfast than in Dublin. Very interesting. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Belfast as well. It begs the question whether one might sort of reverse that and do Belfast and the north coast of Ireland and then visit Dublin from there. Certainly a possibility. So thank you, Eric. So commenting about that it's an interesting concept. Kendra's asking about Christmas markets. I think so. I think that's something we'll revisit as well. I've got a whole Christmas market program in mind, which is not a river cruise. In fact, it's actually going to the best Christmas markets, which are not connected by a river. Okay, good. So interesting feedback about Belfast in Northern Ireland. I've personally driven a car along the north coast of Northern Ireland to the Giant's Causeway and the Jameson Distillery and all these wonderful places up there, and it is truly spectacular. Okay, good. So some comments about. So Jean would like to vote for all of them, but she can't vote for the others. So yeah, so we. Not to worry that this is not sort of a scientific mission that we're gonna hold you accountable for these answers. Rather, it's just for us sort of an indication. Okay, good. So lots of comments about Northern Ireland. So that's great. Please do email us with your comments, feedback. Again, very, very important to us because we read everything. And sometimes we'll even come back to you and say, tell us more about what you think about that, because I want us to come up with the kind of trips and the kind of experiences that you want as our members. And we've been very successful with that so far, at least until 2020, and we will be in 2021 and beyond. And so I'll take the opportunity to thank you all for participating and indulging me for an hour and 10 minutes. I look forward very much to hearing you. 2 weeks' time, we'll be having our next Future Travel Forum. The subject will be Southern Europe. More details will come out with that in our newsletter this week, as well as some poll results from some of the questions that you answered today. And so, yeah, thank you for the additional, oh, sorry, there's Joel just mentioned there's a couple of things. Yes, so a couple of people mentioned about saying they missed the webinar. Yes, so there will be a copy of this webinar sent to you automatically by email. So feel free to look at it again, or you can forward it on to somebody if in case you know somebody that missed them. There's a comment here about booking closer to the departure time. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Carolyn, about booking and cancellations and all the rest of this stuff. This is something we're undoubtedly grappling with right now because the industry is in so much flux. And of course, everybody wants to have the flexibility and the knowledge that their payments are going to be safe, and that they're not going to be held to they're not going to be stuck as it happened a lot this year, because this all happened to us very unexpectedly. So very, very valid comments. We are rethinking everything in terms of how we deliver our programs, and we know that people are often going to be holding out to the last minute so that they're confident that we'll be able to travel. Thanks again, everybody. I appreciate your joining us today. I look forward to catching up with you again very, very soon. I send you my greetings from here in Thailand to back home in Canada, and we'll see you this weekend. Have a good day.